I'm Packy McCormick, and I run Not Boring and Not Boring Capital. I grew up outside Philadelphia. I think was one of those kids who, just got involved in a lot of different things. Was, kind of a combination of good student and class clown, which I think probably comes through a little bit now. I would try to use essays as an opportunity to make my teachers laugh, but also have enough kind of good content in there that they couldn't give me a bad grade. Ended up going to Duke and studying econ, and went into finance kind of right after the financial crisis, or right in the middle of the financial crisis in 2009. And the whole time, I think I knew that I was interested in startups. I think the first month that I was at Bank of America, I was working with a friend on an idea for a startup. I started a party bus company on the side that took kids back and forth from New York to different kind of beach towns. So always wanted to do something. But finally, I think when I was getting ready to leave Bank of America Merrill Lynch, I applied to business school, getting ready to go. And then I found this company called Breather on AngelList. And so pulled out of business school, applied to this company, interviewed while I was unemployed for 4 months, ended up there, getting the job running our New York market, and then spent 6 years there, which is an infinite amount of time, I think, in startups, but learned an absolute ton. Things went well, things went poorly, and I think I kind of got to learn from both of those experiences. And finally, left in the end of 2019. I was thinking about starting another kind of in-person based startup myself, really doing the founder thing, and then COVID hit. And that killed kind of the dream. I tried to bring the thing that I was thinking about doing, which was physical place-based, online, realized that I didn't actually like being an online community manager, and so took it offline, paused it, and then started writing this newsletter full time. And really at the time, kind of the insight that I had was that Ben Thompson was as good as you're gonna get at writing a business strategy newsletter, but Ben Thompson had to be serious. He built up an audience around being serious. So what if I did that, but not boring? What if I did that with pop culture mixed in, and memes mixed in, and shitty Figma design mixed in, and all this different stuff that would just make it different, kind of like those high school essays where there's both good content and there's real numbers and all of that, but then it's also a little bit of fun. And so tried doing that for a few weeks, and tried, playing around with a bunch of different essay ideas that mixed pop culture directly. So like, how does the Mickey Mouse Club and Schumpeter's Gale, this economics concept, combine to say that actually we're probably going to be fine coming out of COVID, and it's probably actually a good thing for a lot of people that they're being taken out of the jobs that they've kind of felt stuck in or more comfortable in, and get thrown into something else. And I think we've seen that kind of play out where over the past 18 months, a lot of people have quit the jobs that they had gotten sick of and gone and joined the creator economy and done their own thing. I talked to my wife. I think she gave me 3 months to do Not Boring. I asked for 3 months to do Not Boring and see if I could do anything with it, grow it, make $1 from it. So ended up growing Not Boring during kind of the first 3 months of COVID, to the point where I hadn't made $1 yet, and my wife was pregnant and all of that. But for whatever reason, I think maybe it was the optimism in a time of otherwise kind of a dark period, it started just kind of taking off. And so week by week, I'd have 100 new subscribers, and then 200 new subscribers, and it just kind of grew and grew and grew, to the point where there was never really a full-time decision to go full-time on this thing. It was more, this is growing, I can't stop this. And worst case scenario, maybe somebody in the audience has a job for me at some point. And best case scenario, maybe this becomes a job. I look back at some decisions that I've had over the past, call it 18 months, where I could have parlayed this into a job that 3 months before would have seemed like the greatest, craziest opportunity that I could have ever possibly hoped for. And then 3 months later, that feels like a stale opportunity. I think one of the most fun things about getting to work for myself and write this newsletter is that I get to follow what I'm most interested in at any given time. So for a while last year, it was talking about public companies and writing about companies like Tencent and Alibaba and Facebook and Twitter and Snap and all of those companies. And then over the past, call it 6 to 9 months, it's shifted a lot towards startups and towards Web3 companies. And so it's this evolution where I think probably if I had to boil it down to an elevator pitch, it's going to be the most optimistic take on what's going on and what all this crazy stuff is happening out there. Not Boring is the optimistic take on the craziness that's happening out there, backed by hopefully some real figures and stats and real concepts. The community that's evolved around Not Boring, it's a bunch of people who just want at least to have the optimistic perspective on everything that's going on out there. If the Not Boring community were a quarter as passionate as the eco community, I would be very happy. The similarities between the two communities are there are people who understand that things just get better and better and better over time. And you can look at any one given point and say, here are all these things that are terribly wrong with the world. And here's the banking system, which is obviously a mess, and people get charged overdraft fees, and people don't understand what's going on with their money or where their money is going. Both the Not Boring and the eco communities look at that as an opportunity and as something that will improve over time, but that needs action from the people in the community to actually make it improve. And so I think that's the overlap. But the eco community is a wild beast of optimists and doers and people who really have bought into this future that eco is bringing about. 99 times out of 100, all else equal, given the right tools, an open system beats a closed system. It leaves room for more people to shape the direction. It leaves more room for serendipity. It leaves more room for emergence. All these really good properties, and it ideally kind of aligns incentives among participants better than a closed system might. So I wrote this piece called Entropy Theory about the idea that things get more and more and more chaotic over time. The universe kind of tends towards disorder and chaos. And so if you look at history in a lot of different industries and just kind of broadly, what happens is that things are closed and then they explode wide open. There's all sorts of chaos, and then the next group comes in and brings order to that system, and then it explodes open again. It's similar to the Jim Barksdale idea that there are only two ways to make money, bundling and unbundling, with a little bit more of a directional arrow kind of up and to the right, where things are, things start kind of closed by necessity because the tools that we have are to say, great, we can manage our 150 person tribe and that is it, and whatever we farm or hunt is what we're stuck with. And then over time that gets more and more and more chaotic, and people bring order to that chaos, and that's a huge opportunity. I think Napster and the music industry is one of those examples where music was fairly closed. Napster came in, created all this chaos, they blew it wide open, and then they got shut down, and somebody like Spotify comes in that brings order to that chaos and creates opportunities both for artists and for listeners to have every song in the world at their fingertips for $9.99 a month. And now we're in a spot where it's getting blown open again, and there are music NFTs and the opportunity for artists to make even more money and to kind of fill out the demand that they have for their songs. They have some super fans that right now are underserved by the tools, and maybe Web3 and NFTs give artists new ways to monetize and give fans new ways to engage. That's going to blow things open in all sorts of ways that are really hard to predict. And then that will create opportunities in the future for other people to bring order to that chaos. And so I think that's, if you look at kind of the historical arc, I think that's one of the most interesting ways to view how the world evolves. What's happened in fintech is we had a fairly closed banking system. We had a bunch of really small banks, and then there was consolidation in the industry, and now we have still a bunch of small community banks and all of that, but really some kind of like massive banks out there. Over the past decade, I think companies like Stripe and Plaid and a lot of the infrastructure companies in fintech ended up blowing it open a little bit, where anybody with a computer and the ability to write a little bit of code or at least stitch together some kind of APIs and underlying infrastructure is able to build banking products. But a lot of that is still built on top of the banking system. Plaid plugs into a bunch of different banks. Stripe is built on top of Wells Fargo. And so then you're seeing kind of this evolution to DeFi and to Web3, which is blowing things up again. And there's an opportunity in fintech to then say, great, things have been blown up. We have all these new underlying primitives. How do you rebuild the financial system totally from scratch? What's going to be really interesting to me is seeing what the evolution of eco looks like over time as it takes more and more advantage of the underlying Web3 primitives and potentially becomes a Web3 primitive itself. And I think eco starts out as bundling. It says your money's in all of these different places. You don't know what's going on with it. We're blowing things up a little bit. Here's one app to manage all of your money. And by the way, we're going to give you better rewards. We're going to give you better tracking. You're going to get eco points when you do anything, but it's all in one place, and kind of blows up a lot of the things that are siloed right now into something that anybody can apply to the business that they're building build rewards into the system, do all these things that you couldn't do before, because Eco is both kind of this bundled app right now, and then in the future, this underlying set of primitives that other people can use to build better products for their customers. The fun thing about predicting the future is you can just kind of look at what's happening right now at the fringes, or even, I don't think it's even necessarily fringe anymore, where there are people who are getting involved in the projects that they like and want to support earlier. They're sharing financial upside. Creators are taking home more of the value that they create instead of giving it to platforms. So Web3 is kind of just an evolution of the internet built on blockchains and smart contracts, essentially code with rules and guarantees written into the code itself. What's happening with Web3 more broadly is just that there is this new set of tools to align incentives and give people the opportunity to get involved in something early. Web3 and crypto maybe gets a bad rap because, unlike any other new technology in the history of the world, it was born with money baked in. So it was born with the opportunity to speculate, and people speculated on Bitcoin and Dogecoin, and right now Shiba. And so there's this opportunity for speculation, but I think if you look at kind of what's underneath all of that are just these essentially open source projects with tokens built in that people can earn for contributing to a project, people can invest in to express their interest in this project succeeding and share in the upside if it does. But I think if you boil Web3 down, Web 1.0 was just kind of the read internet, right? On Web 1.0, somebody who knew how to code put something on the internet and people could consume it. Web 2.0 became a little bit more interactive version of that. It became easier for anybody to type something and have it show up on the internet. But to kind of handle all the complexity that came with trying to put something on the internet without everybody becoming a coder, Web 2 meant that there were these easy interfaces that were controlled by centralized companies. I don't think centralization is a bad thing or an evil thing, but it does mean that the value accrues to that organization in the center. What Web3 does is it takes the best kind of both worlds, the openness of a Web 1 with the kind of incentive structure and ease of a Web 2, where in Web 3, anybody can contribute to this thing, anybody can read and write in easy ways, and they can share in the financial upside of participating early and adding value. If you look at something like a Facebook has its own code base internally that's closed. It can change the rules whenever it wants. If you're a developer who built Farmville and all of a sudden Facebook stops sending you traffic and changes the rules there, that's a really bad thing. If you're a news organization that built on top of Facebook and built your whole distribution plan around Facebook and they decided to change the algorithm, that's a really bad thing. If you're building on Web3, you can engage and look at the smart contract yourself and say, like, cool, here are the rules. These rules are baked in. These rules cannot be changed. I feel more comfortable building on top of this thing because it's out in the open and the rules are baked into the contract. So I think that is a big thing, is that the code is open for anybody to see. If a project behaves poorly, someone else can just take that code, and if they have support from the community, go build a fork of that same exact project and try to attract people over by saying, look, this is better. We share more economics with the people who are involved. We're not being greedy in any way. We're not changing the rules on you. And if we are, by all means, take the code and go build the exact same thing and bring people over to that project. So I think the fact that there are guarantees built into the code and anybody can see it and anybody can riff on top of it is a big thing. In terms of riffing on top of it, the composability is also a huge thing, that anytime somebody builds a primitive in Web3, it's out there for somebody else to build on top of and create more and more and more complex and interesting companies and protocols and projects by using the code that other people have written. So if you take a company like Mirror that started out looking like a Web3 publishing platform where you owned the stuff that you wrote, and it wasn't owned by a central company and it wasn't in a central repository somewhere that you couldn't control. You could take what you wrote and pull it anywhere. They started adding a bunch of tools themselves to build out the Mirror ecosystem. They built this thing called the Write Race, where the community voted on who the next 10 writers who had access to the platform were going to be able to be. They built something called Editions, where you could sell editions of the things you wrote as NFTs to raise money for a project, either after you wrote it or before you wrote it. They give you the ability just more generally to sell the things that you write and create as NFTs. They gave you the ability to split the proceeds from those sales with other people. All of those things were internal to the Mirror ecosystem until last week when they blew it all up and made all of those tools accessible to anybody in the ecosystem to build on top of. So they created this whole set of primitives for themselves that they then opened up. And now anybody can build a token race into their project. Anybody can build splits from NFT proceeds into their project by using this code that Mirror built. And I think that's emblematic of the kind of building that happens in Web3. Web3, when I interact with any site, I have my Ethereum address or my Sol address, I have a wallet, and I'm using that to sign in to anything. I can sign in without anybody knowing who's behind that address. There are tools being built on top where, to interact with different parts of the financial system or other systems, you need to prove that there's a real person behind that thing. So there's something called a DID, or a distributed identity, that lets you prove once that there is a real kind of human soul associated with that address, but then sign in and take your wallet with all of your assets with you wherever you go across the internet. So that if I accumulate a bunch of followers on Twitter, or if I get a bunch of likes on Facebook, or if I buy a bunch of NFTs, it's not stuck to the platform in which I bought it in the first place, or in which I accumulated those followers in the first place. It all lives in this wallet that I can portably take with me anywhere across the internet. I think we're at the very, very, very early stages of people building for that paradigm where you come with your own inventory built in anytime you log into a site without having to give up your email address, without having to give up your address or your ID or anything like that. I think that we're going to see an explosion in new products that are built around that kind of new primitive over the next couple of years, and certainly over the next decade, that is not going to feel anything like kind of the experiences that we have online today. I wrote a piece called The Great Online Game, which is about this idea that life is really turned into what really looks like kind of the definition of a video game, using some sort of controller, the keyboard in this case, to manipulate objects on the screen and achieve a goal. And that's really what life has turned into for a lot of people who spend a lot of their time online at this point. So it's this proto kind of shittier version of the metaverse right now. And I think the next decade will just be around building infrastructure and better experiences around that. Like, it's not great that right now a lot of the human interaction that you have is on this kind of flat screen in this very 2D way with whatever Zoom background someone chooses to put up. I think a lot of this can take a dystopian turn, and people who are critics of these ideas are like, oh, you're just going to spend all of your time plugged into the system with goggles on in the Facebook metaverse. But I think that underappreciates kind of human agency and our ability to make choices and do only the things that are going to make us feel better or happier or whatever else. And so people are going to just be building experiences to try to attract people into their piece of the virtual world over the next decade. And I think what that's going to lead to is richer experiences online. It doesn't replace the physical world, but it means that when you are now spending time on a Zoom or scrolling Twitter or Facebook or whatever else, you're doing that in a more fun environment that feels a little bit more like the real world would, but just digitally. I think the Mark Zuckerberg dream, or even the Microsoft dream, of a controlled metaverse where we all log into Facebook and we go into the Facebook world and all the commerce happens inside of Facebook and we're buying Facebook branded NFTs and all of that. Or you can build kind of an interoperable system where different people get to build their different bazaars in the metaverse, in the virtual world, where NFTs and DeFi and tokens come back into play because, again, you have your wallet, you have your inventory. And so one thing that you buy in one particular part of the world might be interoperable with a game that you want to go play. You could buy a CryptoPunk over here if you have enough ETH to do so. You could buy a CryptoPunk and then go into a game world and walk around in that game world and play with that CryptoPunk as your avatar. And that's a kind of striking version of it, and almost like a almost jokey version of it. But that ability to purchase one thing in one part of the internet and bring it with you wherever else you go, just like you can buy something in the physical world and wear it wherever you go, is not something that is actually the way it works now. If you buy a skin in Fortnite, that skin works in Fortnite alone and you can't take it elsewhere. If you stop playing Fortnite, all the time and money and everything that you've spent in that world just kind of dies when you stop playing. in an open metaverse, what happens is that everything that you accumulate in one part of this whole ecosystem is transferable and operates in different parts of the ecosystem. So it does feel, I think, a little bit more like the physical world. And I think that's one of the things that Web3 or the blockchain does really well, right? Like Bitcoin behaves a lot more like cash, where you can just take some and give it to somebody else, than digital money operating through a bank where you have to go through an intermediary. It's like if you had to take your cash, give it to somebody else, to then give it to somebody else, and they take a cut on the way. NFTs make digital objects right now, JPEGs and art and things that people like to make jokes about, but make digital objects unique and scarce and ownable and make them behave more like a physical object would. And I think an open metaverse is really a virtual world that behaves more like the physical world would, but just virtually, with all of the design space that opens up. Right now, if you have a closed metaverse and you can buy NFTs, but they work inside of Facebook, or you can buy digital goods and they work inside of Facebook, you have very much the same problem where all of a sudden you're beholden to Facebook, right? I think one of the defining kind of theories of Web 2.0 is Ben Thompson's aggregation theory, where there's these big giants like Facebook and like Google, whose job it is to aggregate all of the demand side attention and then distribute it wherever they want. And so both sides of the transaction end up being a bit beholden to this kind of central kind of routing system that Facebook and Google are. If you have the same thing in a virtual world where people are spending more of their money on virtual goods and more of their time online, I think that problem only gets exacerbated. Whereas if it's an open world, what would happen is I can buy things in one place and take them to another. I think if you were to design everything from scratch today, the idea that you could purchase something and then not be able to take it with you would seem absolutely crazy. It's just kind of a function of the fact that we didn't have the tools or technology to let people bring things with them wherever they went across the internet. And so that gave power to the places where most of the people aggregated. This is an opportunity to say, great, it is your item, it is your work, it is your identity, it is your money. It's all of these things, they're yours, and you can take them with you across this virtual world. Going back to a closed version of the metaverse would feel like, I think Matt Ball had this analogy, would feel like if you went into a mall and in one store they took a certain type of money and you could only wear the outfit that you were wearing in that certain store, and then to go into the next store, you had to change your clothes and use a totally different type of money and rebuild your friend group and all of that every place that you went in the mall. It would seem crazy if that's how the physical world operated, and I think in a decade it'll feel crazy if that's how the virtual world operates. So if you look at the definition, like the Merriam-Webster definition of a video game, it's something to do with manipulating objects on a screen to achieve a certain goal or something like that. And if you take a step back and look at what we've been doing over the past year and a half, really since COVID started and everybody moved a lot of their work online, you're tapping a keyboard and making objects appear on screen. Maybe you're doing designs in Figma, maybe you're on a Zoom call, maybe you're writing something, but all of the work that you do is essentially manipulating digital objects on a screen. And so it's definitionally kind of like a video game, and it also feels a little bit like a video game, right? Where people are meeting people on Twitter or in Discords or in wherever else. They're coming together as these little guilds and trying to achieve different goals together. It feels like a game in the fact that there's really less downside now than there ever has been before in starting something or trying a new project or doing something with a group of people and just seeing where it goes. Crypto is a huge part of this, where now there's this kind of like in-game currency for the great online game that people, again, can transfer with them from one place to another online by logging into different places with your MetaMask or your wallet, whatever wallet you happen to choose. And so the internet has become this great game where the things that you do in one part of the game, the things that you tweet on Twitter might lead to job opportunities or might lead to a speaking engagement or might lead to a best friend or a spouse or all these different crazy things that can happen. So it's really like almost like the Cars idea of an infinite game, but turned back into a game and played online where there's really no set of rules, but each person can come into it, dive in at any point with the attributes that they happen to have, and decide to start playing and treating themselves almost as their own avatar in this game where you get infinite chances to reset and try new things and meet new people. So the internet has turned into this big video game with these real world implications that can lead to jobs or friends or family, or not family, I guess eventually family, jobs or friends or a spouse or whatever you want your goal to be on the internet, you can kind of go out there and do it now. And so all of a sudden, this thing that seemed very serious, like going to work and clocking in and doing something 9 to 5, really does feel a lot more game-like and like you can jump in and out of it than it ever has before. In a video game, you accumulate points of some sort, you accumulate currency of some sort that you can use to buy assets in the game that give you an advantage and let you kind of do all sorts of different things that maybe if you're a beginner starting out and you haven't earned the currency, you're not able to do. It gives the game, on top of just kind of passing level by level as games are evolving to be kind of more open worlds, it gives you a sense of progress and direction in the game and the ability to unlock more and more things over time. In the Great Online Game, that is crypto or digital assets or rewards points. I love going into the Eco Discord and seeing people contribute and get granted Eco points for their contribution to the community. And so it is this kind of like real-time scoreboard that's going on across a bunch of different types of assets as people play the game. By tweeting or by setting up a scavenger hunt across the world or solving things in that scavenger hunt, or just being a community member and making sure that we all win together, people are picking up points that they can then use to do other things and advance themselves in this great online game. Fiat currency isn't nearly as portable as either digital assets or reward points or crypto is, because to send somebody money, you need to send it through an institution. It takes some time. It could take a few days to transfer money to somebody. There's something a little bit gauche about bragging about the fact that you have $1 million sitting in a bank account somewhere, and you're certainly not going to expose that bank account to anybody else. But if you say, look, I have 50,000 Ego points, that is not just bragging and saying like, look, I'm very wealthy and that could have come from anywhere. Those 50,000 Ego points say like, look, I'm an active member of this community and I've clearly made positive contributions to this community. Look, you can see it on the scoreboard here. You can see it in my Eco points. And so I think it takes a little bit of the gaucheness out. It makes it instant and at the speed of a Discord message. But it also says, look, I've been an active member of this community and I've been contributing or at least playing the game really well and flipping NFTs or aping into the right new DeFi protocol or X, Y, or Z thing. Because I have this thing, it shows you that I'm good at this other thing. There's this interesting idea that I remember reading about in behavioral economics, that if you reward people in cash directly with an amount that they know that they're going to make for doing something, it actually decreases both their intrinsic motivation and their overall motivation to do the thing. It makes it feel a whole lot more transactional. I do X thing, I get Y dollars, ho-hum, that is what it is. I think the really interesting thing about digital assets more generally is that, one, there's a bit of variable reward. So you never know how much you're going to get for doing any given thing. There's the kind of thrill of doing something, not even necessarily knowing that you're going to be rewarded for it, and then getting rewarded for doing that thing. And because there are a bunch of different types of digital assets that you get rewarded for, you can kind of signal something with what you have. With Eco points, when you go into the community, it's not just Henry and Andy saying, hey, if you go design this website for us, we'll give you 1,000 Eco points. It's people all of the time appreciating and rewarding each other for the different contributions that they're making to the community. So it's this really peer-to-peer thing where, sure, Eco itself can say, if you spend money, you're going to get Eco points. And that's great. It means that you have this kind of reward that you might not have had if you were using a Bank of America card. And it's certainly a lot better than earning 0.01% in your checking account or your savings account. But the magical thing to me is that it's this whole community of people giving Eco points to each other and rewarding their actions, or people going out and doing things on their own. One, just because they want to be a member of the community. So whether it's going and building that merch, the Eco merch store, without any expectation of a reward in return, and then getting Eco points from both Eco and the community for doing it. I think just the existence of a reward point opens the door for people to go out and just try to contribute in as many ways as they possibly can, and the best way that they possibly can. One, to be a part of the community, and then two, because they know that there's this reward point that the community will give them if they contribute in the right ways and in a value-added way to the community. When you have a more open rewards system and people are just rewarded for their contributions to a community, but then can take that and do other things with it outside of that particular community, it means that Eco needs to continue earning the trust and participation of their community, and that just because they gave somebody Eco points doesn't mean that you're locked into having to use this product. If Eco doesn't fulfill its promises and if Eco isn't the best product over time, you can take those rewards points and take them with you wherever you want to spend them. And that's a really magical thing because it incentivizes the company to continue building a great product and not resting on its laurels. And then the next layer up, just the existence of reward points that can move anywhere on the internet facilitates the playing of the great online game. It means that I could tweet something, Henry could see that tweet, and he could reward me Eco points for the fact that he appreciated the subtlety of the meme that I dropped in that tweet. And it means that people can reward each other more easily for things that otherwise would have just had way too much overhead to ever reward. People can now reward each other for those types of things, and I think that's a magical thing. I'm not gonna go out and give someone $5 for sharing a Not Boring piece. That feels too transactional and kind of gross, and I think would actually probably disincentivize sharing. If I had a digital asset, if it's a Packy point or an Eco point, that I could just say, hey, thanks for sharing this, or that was a really great idea, here's 50 Eco points. I think that adds this whole other layer of community interaction where people are then incentivized to contribute to Not Boring in all sorts of ways, and in ways that I couldn't have ahead of time prescribed, where I say, hey, look, if you retweet this, it's $5. Nobody's gonna do that. But if I say, hey, there are these Packy points or there are these Eco points out there that I can give out to people when they do things that are particularly unique and interesting and help Not Boring in the community in some way, that just opens up a whole different dimension of interaction and reward within the community that's not possible right now. One of the biggest kind of contributions of all the different things that have come together, whether that's remote work, whether that's Web3, whether that's the rise of startups and their ability to raise more money, whether that's the creator economy, power is undoubtedly shifting from large institutions to individuals. So I wrote a piece called Power to the Person about how that's happening, and that, you know, in the next decade, 2 decades, 5 years, there will be kind of a single person at the center of an entity that's worth $1 trillion. And they could use contractors and part-time participants and software and AI and all sorts of stuff. But at some point in the future, there will be $1 trillion entity with a single person kind of at the center of it. And one of the pieces of pushback I got on that essay, and certainly something that I believe as well, is that feels like a weird, lonely future if we're all out there just operating for ourselves. And that's not how I see the world going. And it's not even how I see what's happening online right now. But I think what's happening is that individuals are getting their own agency, and then they're choosing kind of who they team up with. The comp that I used was in the NBA, where it used to be very, very top down. A team said, I want this person, this person, this person, and this person on the team. You're contractually locked in. You know, the draft used to mean that you were locked up with a certain team indefinitely. And now, you know, I think starting with kind of the Miami Heat and LeBron James, players are able to choose, in some sense, who they want to play with and make demands on making that happen and get teams to trade them or signing as free agents where they want to go. And they're building their own super teams based on the people that they want to play with. That's happening online now. As individuals get more agency, they're deciding to join forces in different ways. And so one of the ways that they're doing that is by joining and forming DAOs and joining DAOs and bouncing from one DAO to another. That is people starting startups together where there are no full-time employees. I'm part of one called Maple that is just a bunch of people doing something part-time that is different creators teaming up on different projects. Maybe an engineer and an artist and an investor will team up on an NFT project, or somebody with a following and an artist will team up on an NFT project. So it's people saying, like, here are the things that I'm particularly good at. Let me go find those people out there who, one, I like working with, and two, have complementary skill sets. And let's join forces for maybe a week, maybe a day, maybe a year, maybe a decade. But let's join forces in the way that we want, with our own agency kind of at the center of this, and do things together that, you know, we wouldn't have been able to do if we needed to all convince a company to hire us, or you know, if we were stuck inside of a company and working kind of 9 to 5 in an office every day. So it's, one, I think, breaking it all down to kind of individual agency and power, and then two, those individuals deciding to team up together to do more than they could by themselves. Ben Thompson, when he was trying to describe what was happening in media and publishing, wrote about this idea of the smiling curve. The fact that on one side there are either the big giants like Facebook and Google or the New York Times, and they end up doing really, really well because they have the brand value and they have the eyeballs and they have everything that you need to run a successful kind of media organization and direct eyeballs to the right place. On the other side, you have, and certainly Not Boring is a beneficiary of this, a bunch of individuals who are publishing on their own, whether on YouTube or on Substack or on TikTok or wherever else, who only have the cost structure of having to support one person. It costs me practically nothing to write Not Boring, and so you can be a lot more nimble and you can make do with a lot smaller audience on that side of things. You kind of fit in the little niches of the internet and have a cost structure as an individual that supports that. In the middle, you have all of these organizations that are like mini versions of the New York Times that aren't able to compete, that don't have the same brand power, that don't have the same quality, but do have the same cost structure, where you have an ad sales team and an editorial team and all these things that a legacy media organization would need to succeed. So you have this cost structure that's legacy and that's an albatross around your neck. You have an undifferentiated product, and you're trying to compete with both the New York Times over here and a bunch of individuals who can be a lot more nimble and go after a lot smaller audience over here and still make it work. And so you end up getting crushed and all the profits go to both sides. More profits go to the big side, but enough profits go to each individual that they can make a living off of doing what they do. And I think you're seeing that happen more and more and more, where there's going to be big organizations on one side, the very best of the best will be totally fine. Individuals have more and more power and the ability to just kind of sustain on smaller pieces of the ecosystem, but really make a lot of noise and add a lot of value there. And then in the middle, you're going to get crushed if you are undifferentiated, but still have kind of the same cost structure as the big guys. What I mean when I say that cooperation is the winning strategy in the great online game is that if you're an individual operating out there, you can either go it alone, which I've done to a large extent to Not Boring, or you can join an organization, or you can try to convince people to work under you for an organization. I think more and more, because they have more options and more opportunity, the most talented people in any given field are going to want to work independently, but there's going to be things that they can't do alone. Let's take me. I'm a good writer. I'm a terrible designer. I'm a terrible engineer. There's a lot of things that I don't do really well. So if I want to do bigger projects, I can either try to hire a team full-time that wants to do that and give up whatever else they might want to do to come work for Not Boring, or I can go find those other individuals out there who are really, really good at engineering and design and all those other things and ask them to come work on a project with me or do something kind of temporarily. Maybe form a DAO where we, all of us want to give a little bit of our time to a particular thing that we're interested in and combine our talents for that. I think that kind of constellation of people, if you want to do something bigger than you can do alone, is going to be the strategy that ends up winning. So having a token or an in-game currency for the great online game helps kind of organize and align incentives for those cooperative groups of individuals who come together in a way that startup equity can't, with 4-year vesting and a ton of paperwork. If you wanted to go start a DAO together, that DAO now issues a token, you all own some of that token, and you go from there. If you want to go pop in and contribute to Eco for a little while, you can earn Eco points for popping in and adding your skills at the right moment where your skills are the most valuable and the most needed for that community without committing everything and having to wait 4 years for your equity to vest. So it's a lot more liquid way to align incentives among groups of people, and people can build up a portfolio of a bunch of these different bets that they've made on a bunch of different projects and communities, as opposed to putting all of their eggs and all of their time in one basket. One of the things that investors have benefited from, and one of the reasons that venture capital is such a good business model for the ones who do it well, is that you have a portfolio of bets, and some are going to work and some aren't. If you're the founder, that's not the case. And certainly if you're the employee at a startup, that's not the case, where you have kind of all of your eggs in one basket. You don't have the benefits of diversification. You don't have the benefits of portfolio theory. So having in-game currencies and tokens and reward points gives everybody the ability to build a portfolio with upside that turns them from labor to capital by just participating in the things that interest them most and adding their talents where they're needed the most. There's a world in which Not Boring, the great online game, and Eco points come together. I think that there are ways that I can reward participation in Not Boring, the kinds of things that people are doing because they're interested in it or out of the goodness of their own heart now. You can add a little bit more structure around that by being able to reward people for their contributions to the community. One of the things that I feared, I think, in starting something again was, I spent 4 years at Bank of America, which is a long time in finance. I spent 6 years at Breather, which is a long time in a startup. I managed, when I left, I think, a 150-person team. Now that I have had a taste of kind of independence and being able to do my own thing, I really like that, and I like not having the structure and even not having the responsibility of having people who depend on me to feed their families. At the same time, I do want to build something a little bit more permanent than I can build just by myself in Not Boring. And I think adding kind of eco points and a reward system into the mix means that I can get people to kind of contribute in meaningful ways to them, in meaningful ways to me, but in non-permanent ways, in ways where I don't feel like I'm fully responsibility for feeding their family, where it's more upside and reward than it is, responsibility and full-time commitment. And so to me, that's where a Not Boring and eco points would really be valuable, is to build kind of an amorphous structure around this thing that is right now just me and reward people for their contributions to the Not Boring community.